Мене звуть Роман Khmil. Я працюю в IT-індустрії вже більше 10 років, програміст по освіті. І сьогодні буду модерувати панель, присвячену високим технологіям. Високі технології – це не тільки IT, це і енергетика, біотехнології і так далі. Сподіваюся, що ми сьогодні зрозуміємо і знайдемо відповіді на питання, які саме високі технології Україна має розвивати, і яким саме шляхом вона має рухатися, чи може це стати локомотивом нашої економіки. Дозвольте мені представити наших спікерів і учасників. Ми сьогодні маємо Trudy, Norris-Grey, керуючий директор по роботі з державними установами Центральної і Східної Європи, компанія Microsoft. Виктор Halasiuk, президент Асоціації інноваційний розвиток України. Томас Крістенсен, директор по роботі з державними установами Скандинавії, Центральної та Східної Європи та Росії, компанія Facebook. Валерій Fischuk, регіональний менеджер із взаємодії з державним сектором представництва Cisco в Україні, віце-президент Асоціації інноваційний розвиток України.
Дякую.
Yevgen Sysoyev, співзасновник і керуючий партнер венчурного фонду AVentures Capital. Manmeet Singh, інвестор та ментор в Chinaccelerator та викладач в китайських та українських вузах. І Валерій Tsepkalo, директор парку високих технологій в Республіці Білорусь. Оскільки ми працюємо з високими технологіями, і у нас всі англомовні спікери, ми перейдемо на англійську. Ця панель буде англійською, тому, будь ласка, включайте ваші навушники. So at this point, we'll switch into English, and I'd like to set the stage and put some questions in place, which all of you present in and comment in. Please try to reflect on those and comment on those. We'd like to use this opportunity and this forum in Ukraine to find the answer and solution to the question, how do we transform our economy from the resource-based economy, third world, to the knowledge-based economy, to the high-tech and developed country? And which industries or technologies can become locomotives of that transformation? What does it mean in particular? Any recipes, any reflections on other countries? When we talk high-tech, we talk not only about IT, it can be biotechnologies, it can be green tech. So it's a variety of technologies, but basically we're talking about technology-driven economy and knowledge-based economy, which can help Ukraine a lot. Couple questions which we're trying to answer also is, how do we evolve on that transformation path? For example, in IT industry, the first step would be shipping our brains abroad, right? Second step would be to bring work to Ukraine, and that's called outsourcing. So that still you keep IT abroad, you keep product ideas abroad, but you hire the workforce and talent pool in Ukraine. Second, and the next step would be bringing R&D centers of foreign companies here, captives, so to say. And after that, how do we arrive at products, and how do we bring venture capital here, and how do we create the ecosystem and environment to have our own R&D, our own products and IP, which Ukraine can capitalize on in the long run. Any reflections on experience of other countries, any recipes are very welcome. So keeping that in mind, I'd like to give a couple minutes to each of our panelists to present and comment on our agenda, and then we'll have some wrap-up time in the end to discuss and debate on this. Let's start with Trudy.
Of course.
First of all, it's great to be here. Thank you very much. The title of this session is Ukraine in the High-Tech Race. Can I be provocative?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
I don't think you're in the race. And yet you have every right to be in the race. You've got the skills. You've got a very well-educated population, the envy of many other countries. You have network readiness that's very high on the competitive scale. But you don't seem to value the intellectual property of the IT industry. Let me give you some facts. The piracy rate of software is very, very high in Ukraine. That tells me that you don't value it. Now, if you don't value it and you're not prepared to pay for it, who's going to come and establish an IT industry in Ukraine? Those IT industry professionals who could stay in Ukraine won't stay here. They'll keep going abroad. So you have to decide whether you're going to value intellectual property rights for IT and other technologies. You have to decide that you want to be in the race. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and again, forgive me for being provocative, it's just to get the conversation going. I would say, use this crisis as a pivotal moment. The Chief of Staff of the White House uses that phrase a lot. Use a crisis to your advantage. You are at a pivotal moment in your history, is my belief. And when I joined this event today, and I was sitting in the audience, listening to the opening comments, listening to the fact that you lived 10 years less than me, are you happy with that? Are you happy with the corruption that you talked about? Are you happy that you're not industrialized? For me, you're in a crisis. There's only one way up, is what you talked about in the opening comments. Take this opportunity to make a difference. And let me give you some encouragement. I'm a citizen of the UK. And in the year 2000, and that's just 14 years ago, I was asked by the UK government to help and advise them on e-government, making the process of government more efficient. 14 years on, I use this as a citizen of the UK to engage with my government. I use it as a phone, I use it for my photos, I use it for the calendar, but actually I use it to find out which hospitals are better than other hospitals.
Microsoft.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Microphone.
I find out what the crime rates in one area of London is another area of London. I find out how efficient my taxes are spent by the London Authority. I also find out which are the quickest ways home. I find out
Could we get help with microphone? Maybe change it.
Let's change it.
I can talk loud as well. So I use this. You may say to me, we're not in this high-tech race, guys.
It's to not to hear through. Yeah. Could you help us, please?
Let me check.
Thank you. So thank you.
Yeah.
So 14 years ago, one of the great economies, one of the G8, the UK, used this thing just to make telephone calls. And now it runs my life. I panic when I run out of battery. I panic if there's a system problem. Believe me, in Ukraine, it will be the same for you. So take a vision and decide that you want to make a difference. Decide that you want open government, because that's what the UK did. It started by just making government processes more efficient. Then it started opening its data. And you need to do that. You need it for your own transparency reasons. You talked about corruption and doing away with it. Knowing which hospitals are better than another hospitals tells the poorly performing hospitals to do better. And guess what happens? The quality of all hospitals increase. All educational establishments increase. Police forces, army, cybersecurity gets better. Please believe me that it's a journey that you can take much quicker than the UK took 14 years to do it, little by little by little. Use the experience of other countries to set your vision and go and deliver it. As I said, you've got the capability, you've got the people, and you've got the readiness. Now, the other thing I'd like to say is that you have aspirations about joining the EU club. The EU expects that IT is at the heart of everything that you will do. It's the first pillar of 7 initiatives. It's called the Digital Agenda. If you really are intent on the EU, you've got to. You've got no choice. But I'm telling you, do it for the right reasons, for transparency, but also it increases GDP, which is what you're all after. You want to increase the wealth of this great country. You want to increase the well-being of you great citizens. So take this as an opportunity. Get the right processes in place. Cloud, trustworthy cloud, the right open data. Make it available so that you can see transparency. Continue to educate your people, because you do it very, very well. And create an IT industry by valuing the intellectual property of IT. Start paying for it, because once you do that, people will stay here and create jobs and create wealth for this great country.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, very insightful. And I think we all know some technical steps and prerequisites are required, but it's really the inspiration and energy and vision behind the transformation which should be at the top. I was very inspired by it. And I'd like to switch the microphone to Thomas Christensen, Facebook. Microsoft's been around in Ukraine for years, maybe more than 20. How do you catch up with them? What's your take on Ukraine? And what you can suggest and advise? What do we need to do, Facebook, to be here?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and participate in this very exciting conference here today. I'm really excited about it, and I'm also really excited to be here, as it is actually my first time here in Ukraine. I want to start by perhaps saying a few things about Facebook and how Facebook operates, and then perhaps turn to some of the value that we think Facebook brings to communities and hopefully also to the Ukraine. We are not here but on the ground, but we have many users here, and we naturally value that, and we also have many businesses, of course. Facebook's mission is to make the world a more open and connected place, to connect people, whether it's because they want to share cat photos, whether they want to start discussions about political topics, whether they want to do business, whatever is there, we are there to connect them around the world and hopefully make their lives more better. We have now about 1.3 billion users around the world. We also actually still are quite a small company. We have about 6,000 employees on a worldwide scale. And we have many, many millions of businesses that use Facebook every day to advertise their products or tell people about the value that their product brings. The way that we are set up in Facebook is that we are actually all of us that have a Facebook account or place advertising on Facebook or has a Facebook page. We are operated out of Facebook Ireland. That is where you go. That's where you get a contract if you enter into a relationship with Facebook. Facebook Ireland is a very important place for us, and that's essentially where we do our business from outside of North America. Facebook Ireland is also the place where, and that is the second part of what it means to be a responsible social network, is that naturally we have a strong belief in freedom of expression and the value that freedom of expression brings to the world. People can express themselves about whatever is on their mind, but we have to balance that as well with safety considerations and the limits that there are to freedom of expression. And those sort of things are also handled mostly handled here from our international headquarters in Dublin, who has the responsibility for what we call community operations. So when people come to Facebook, they have a concern about content they've seen. Most likely, this is going to be dealt with by our people in Dublin. Another part of it that's really important is that we are very clear about how we operate, what's allowed, what's not allowed with us. We call that our community standards. And the second piece of it, which I think is a really interesting thing about the web and something that I think is valuable, it's not that all of the web needs to be like that, but at us, you are actually appearing as who you are. You are appearing with your own name. And you do that because it brings trust. And that's one of the things that we need to build. We need to build trust so people want to communicate, so people want to trade, and that comes with trust. And that's why we have what's called a real name policy on Facebook. Now, if we move closer to the economic value of Facebook, I think this is the interesting thing that we have noticed is that wherever countries are on their sort of development scale, how much internet penetration a country has, wherever they are on the scale, they are jumping to social. So social media is not something you do once you become sort of an advanced internet user. You're jumped there as soon as you get online. You're jumping to social media and becoming part of that world. And the other jump, I think that's happening at the moment, and Trudy alluded to it as well, of course, is the mobile development. People are first and foremost looking at the world through their mobile device. We have PCs and Macs and all of that stuff, but the mobile is where people are seeing the internet through. And I think that shows naturally where you need to be. If you're a business, you need to be there on the mobile as well. Now, we've seen some numbers, and these are mostly EU numbers, but they show that the percentage of GDP that comes from tech in the EU zone is somewhere between maybe 6 and 8%. However, the countries that are really out ahead are approaching 10% and even above 10% at the moment. And that's where I think you ought to be. And how do you get there? Well, naturally, one way is to attract investments from companies. Our company is well known, but it's, as I said, also quite small. We operate out of Ireland, but we bring a lot of potential and value to companies that want to use our technologies to become more successful businesses. And that's where the real growth is. we believe. Deloitte has made a study of this, and it shows that the value that a company like Facebook brings to the European economic area is close to 20 billion euros a year. This is not from Facebook paying its own employees or building offices locally. This is from all the people that use Facebook to advertise, to get to new audiences for their products, and to enable them to access markets that before were much more expensive. To do that, you need naturally to have the infrastructure in place, and you need especially to have SMEs in your economy to realize the value that tech and online advertising brings to their business. Whatever you're in, a bakery, clothes production, whatever it is you do, there might be markets that you can access through online advertising. And that is the value that we bring to local communities. Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate Facebook technology, and it was very instrumental recently during our second revolution. We used it all across, and maybe a tricky question to you: how do you protect technology which becomes sensitive and political on a country level, where it is Russia or China or Ukraine or any other country where government is trying to regulate the technology? It becomes political. How do you deal with that?
We don't operate in China, but for the other for the other countries, what we try to do at Facebook is that we have this department inside Facebook that we call community operations. And community operations is a team of people that are specially trained to look at content that somebody has an issue with on the platform. As I said, we believe very strongly in freedom of expression, but sometimes there can be safety concerns as well that we need to take into consideration. The community operations team will look at this in a completely neutral manner, and they will see whether or not something is in breach of Facebook's community standards. And if it is, it will be removed from the site. But if it is not, it will remain. And this is a team of specially trained people from all around the world, different nationalities. If we need special language capability, we will pull that in. But it's a special team, and it operates 24 hours a day, but mostly in this region by people who are probably Irish, or at least live in Ireland and are part of the team there.
So it looks like you'll have to abandon Russia as well if they push you to license there, right? There's a big debate right now. Yeah. Oh. Thank you. And over to Manmeet, who got a great insight into the either yet to become or already the largest economy in the world, China. We're looking very carefully to that because, yeah, Ukraine's scale is very much different. We don't compare, but it's an interesting example of transformation from a kind of communist state into a market economy, which has been gradual and seems to be very successful. How do you reform the country that way? How do you reform educational system to foster high-tech and technologies and market economy? Over to you.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. It's a great opportunity, and I fully believe in the objectives of this forum, and I'd love to share, my own experiences. So I don't come from big corporations. I used to be a banker, but I left that about 12 years ago and became an entrepreneur. Now, I'll just love to share with you a few of my experiences as an entrepreneur and someone who's seen two great economies change. China, which is where I live, been there for now a dozen years, and India, where I come from. And you couldn't have two very drastically different models of growth than China and India. And if I could sort of start with this statement that I use a lot, China grows because of the government, India grows despite the government. Now, if you truly sort of sit back and try and understand what this actually means, you can immediately start to understand a key important thing. Doesn't matter which way you're going, whether you have that level of government support, push, and everything that China does. China is fabulous at this. They will open the doors for whatever objectives they have in mind. They have 5-year plans. They have very key objectives for each of the 5-year plan, which industry to focus on, what to change, what to reform. Government provides a series of incentives, financial, non-financial incentives. They build an entire infrastructure framework for all industries to succeed in. And then they provide this sort of playing field for private enterprise to come in and succeed, right? Now, in the Chinese model, you can tag on to any one of the objectives in the 5-year plan that they have currently. For instance, right now, the big objective even for China is high tech, moving away from manufacturing and industry, which is no longer something that China is extremely competitive at, to be honest, and moving to high tech. Now, how do they do that? They create industry parks. They allow and promote companies, domestic and international companies, to come in. Setting up a company is extremely easy there. Getting resources and talents, if you are, for example, focused on biotech. So there are about 25 different biotech parks spread out across China, which have been public-private partnerships. Government provides land, provides some capital, private entity comes to manage it. Government has never been very good at managing things for long run. So they will provide all that infrastructure and support. You come in as a company and you leverage that environment, much like you're leveraging Ireland, for example, for your international operations. You have that ease of business and entry and so on. Then you let those private enterprises build on their own. You let global markets address what you need to build. You let global markets tell you what kind of products and services you need to create, where you need to sell it, how you need to develop it. And you don't necessarily then rely on a single economy. You don't rely on a single region. Then, if you look at it from the service economy perspective, you don't have to rely on, how much infrastructure do we have? Because ultimately, a large part of that service economy, wealth, and growth comes from productivity, the labor productivity, human capital, which was already mentioned, you have abundance of. Contrast that with the Indian story, right? So in the Indian story, very similar to, I guess, what I hear and understand about Ukraine, you think you have corruption? Please, visit my place. We will teach anybody something about corruption. Same with China. China is going an extreme purge right now on corruption. India, I have hopes, let's put it that way. But, we are no less corrupt than anybody else. We have a political system that's democratic, which is wonderful, but democracy also comes at a price, and the price is nobody agrees on anything, which I understand to be very similar to the case here, right? So we check that out as well. We have very tough and difficult, business practices. People take some time to understand how to operate in India, how to even operate in China. So we can check that as well. That's the same thing that we have. But then what changed in India? The one thing the government did fabulously was that in 1991, the government went through a reform process. And this is where I think Ukraine can look at some sort of a pivot and learn some lessons from this sort of environment that India created. And it had basically 3 elements to it. So one element was opening up the industry to allow foreign companies and allow private enterprises to operate, very similar to the Chinese model. Let companies come in and do what they need to do, whether it's for a local market or a regional market. And to be honest, the secret sauce for that is out there. I mean, everybody, you know it. You look at China, you look at India. The secret sauce for how to invite enterprises is out there. That's not a big deal at all. Next thing they did was they allowed for Indian companies and made it easier for them to actually start going globally. So that required a lot of foreign exchange regulations, improvement of tax codes, improvement of customs, tariffs, and so on. From a few thousand, I believe, categories of taxes and custom tariffs, India went down to 25 on a gradual basis. So that level of easing that environment enabled entrepreneurs, enabled established businesses to get into new areas, enabled the youth who have those dreams and aspirations, like all of us, to actually go and enact on it and go and actually build something, right? And after that, of course, the government in India didn't do too much, but they created that environment. So if you look at India's growth story today, it's entrepreneur-led. It's entrepreneurs that are either big business, and they've changed their models. All the big, the equivalent of your oligarchs, we had them in India. We had a license system, so only a few businesses were big, and it was pretty much monopoly across industries. But once 91 happened and that opened up, private enterprise came in. And they know what they need to make, for whom, where, and so on and so forth. So broadly, from my perspective, you look at both of these models, not very different in their genesis to where you are. Conceptually, actually not very different. The sizes would be different, but everything else is relatively the same. And the thing that probably Ukraine then has to figure out, what you need to figure out as a nation, is which one do we go for? Or do we go for a hybrid model? Relying too much on the government, you can see what's happening in China. Look at what's happening now in Hong Kong. Interesting enough, Facebook isn't as popular, fortunately, in China because of access. So there is another application called FireChat that is the one that everybody's using for messaging in Hong Kong. That's a private enterprise. There's a need, and there's a private enterprise for it. You look at the internet giants in China, government protected them, and that gave them some scale, but then they innovated and they created products for China. You look at a product like WeChat, which is a messaging application that has messaging, Facebook-like qualities in it, Twitter-like qualities in it. It is a banking platform, it's a payment platform. All of this created by an entrepreneurial entity for a specific market, right? And that, to me, is the beauty of these two models that exist. And I do believe that there's a way forward here to build, and you don't necessarily need everything to be done by the government. You do need to step up and sort of take control of your own future as entrepreneurs. But if that balance can be figured out, potential is enormous. Just look at these two countries where they were in the 70s and 60s and so on, and look at where they are today, right? So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. I know you teach at a couple universities, so question related to that. If we are talking about building the knowledge-based, knowledge-driven economy, should we assume education sector is our backbone, that's an infrastructure? And if so, should we also seek funding, state funding and international funding whenever we talk about those billions of dollars right now being lined up for Ukraine to help? Which investments we need to make, and is it education as an infrastructure project for Ukraine? Is it something else to boost high tech? Is it some government fund or state fund financing high tech startups and so on?
You're killing me here, because that's my panel at 1 o'clock. Is the education panel.
Then
right?
just a quick comment.
They're not going to
here.
come to my panel. I see what you're doing. Okay, I understand. No, look. Let me share a figure with you. When India became independent in 1947, the literacy rate in India was approximately 15%. Today, the literacy rate in India is approaching 80%. The agriculture industry in India as a percentage of GDP in about 1950s was about 65, 68%, and currently agriculture is less than 20%. India jumped from a illiterate, poor, you're saying you're third world. I'm sorry. I'll tell you what third world is. Third world is what my country went through, right? When you have abject poverty and you have people with no food, clothing, and housing and sleeping on the streets, and you have that for the vast majority of your population, that is third world. Frankly, to a large extent, you are already in the first world, whatever these definitions mean anymore. I'm not very clear with them myself, to be honest. But, yeah, India jumped from an agrarian economy, bypassed industrial revolution, and went straight to services. Today's service industry is 60%. And it's no surprise to me that India's growth is service-led, and it's no surprise that we've got literacy now at 80%. So, if you have great industry and you have this industrial DNA and heritage in your country, I understand this, and that's fabulous. Take it, build it. But is that necessarily going to be the one that's going to protect you forever? No. China has been the industrial powerhouse of the world, the manufacturers of the world. Where do you think manufacturing is happening today? Not really in China. Not many people are entering into China to produce anymore. Factories are shutting down, people are getting laid off. They're moving to Vietnam, they're moving to Myanmar, they're moving to Brazil, they're moving to Mexico, they're moving into Africa for manufacturing, right? It's a reverse process that's happening right now. They call it the flying geese model. You can look that up sometime. However, what they are trying to do is go to services. What India has already done is immediately jump to services. And I think that's where you need to be, because it's human capital, and that's your biggest strength. You've got passion, you're going through this intense emotional period as a country, and you've got passion. That passion is what drives this forum, for example, or in other such events. Your dialogue, your discussions with friends. I have a lot of Ukrainian friends. I've known them for a decade now. And every time I talk to them and we talk about Ukraine, there is this intense, fierce pride and passion. And that's fabulous. So leverage that. Leverage that in the people. Leverage it in the education. Because if you don't get them properly educated, but then that education has to be focused. And there's depending on the policy objectives, focus is education. If you're going service industry, which sub-industries, which sectors? Are you going to be, the biotech capital of the world? Are you going to be the IT outsourcing capital of the world? Are you going to be and I hate to use this example, but it's, the Silicon Valley, so to speak, right, of Europe or whatever it is? Are you going to be the mobile development capital of the world? You mentioned mobile. Same thing in India. We tend to do this leapfrogging thing. We had no internet, very few computers, computer penetration was, I think, in the tens. And now we're about 70% mobile penetration. So you have an illiterate vegetable vendor who you write to and say, deliver, tomatoes to my house. And you know how you communicate with this guy? WhatsApp. A product that, originated here. So you write to this guy on WhatsApp and you say, hey, I need vegetables, send them over. We communicate with our pharmacist to get medicines delivered at home. You send him a WhatsApp message. He'll say, oh, don't do that now. Come on my Facebook page, hit some likes. These people never went through traditional education, but they understand mobile. They understand smartphones. And that penetration, that power play there is huge, right? So if you take these sort of key elements, learning from the two countries, definitely have your education policy and programs right. And there are tons of ideas for it, which you will come to at 1 o'clock and learn about. And if you do that, and then I think go all services as hard as you can, as selfishly as you can, right? I don't think there's anything that can stop you, right?
Thank you. So trying to go from a global perspective to a local, we have few Ukrainian speakers, but we have a country right next to us, which is Belarus, and Valery Tsepkalo representing the technopark there, which is the showcase for us, basically, in IT industry at least. That's a country very similar to us, smaller than Ukraine, but ex-former Soviet Union Republic, which is now demonstrating 100% growth year over year consecutively for the previous 5 years, ever since the technopark was established and certain regulations and incentives were put in place. And Valery has been running that experiment and technopark, and we'd like to hear your story, very relevant for Ukraine. What did you do right? What did you do wrong? And your advice to Ukraine.
Thank you. If we speak about Belarus experience, we would definitely like to look at other destinations And we definitely learned when we started this process from other countries, including India, China, Singapore, Malaysia, Korea, Israel. Israel actually was a very inspirational thing for us in terms of building knowledge-based economy, knowledge-based country, where actually IT sector appeared to be the main driving force for their economic development. And you know that actually every country that is successful is trying to apply some cluster approach. Because if you make a critical number of specialists, of professionals working in one field, then you may have the cumulative effect of it. So just we all know, for instance, fashion designers are concentrated in northern Italy. We know that automobile builders are concentrated actually in Bavarian region of Germany. We definitely know Israel, that actually IT is concentrated over there. So if you look at any country, in the US, definitely biotech clusters in Northern Carolina and biotech cluster in Boston region. But what is actually very inspirational is definitely Silicon Valley, and we all know about Silicon Valley. And I used to lecture there like 10 years ago several times. I was there, and there were a lot of guys, young guys, actually coming to me and introducing themselves. Some of them were from Belarus, from Ukraine, from Russia, and they actually achieved very, very high positions in global American or global international corporations that have headquarters or had headquarters at that time in Silicon Valley. And, you know, what actual lesson we can draw out of this? That, you know, many people can say, look, Silicon Valley appeared to be very successful because it was able to absorb the best talents throughout the world or from out the world. And but at that time, I had another conclusion out of what I've seen and what actually I experienced there based on my conversations with Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Russians, and other people from the former Soviet Union that were located there at that time. I thought, look, you know, just if they can be successful there, in America, in absolutely different cultural and language environment, why they could not be successful back in their own country. And the thing is that you should only provide some conditions, some incentives, some environment for them, so they will feel comfortable in their own country, and they can travel throughout the world. They, you know, in case they need, they can go to the US, they can go to Europe, to Japan, to Korea, to Singapore, to serve the clients, actually to work with the clients. But the country where they were born, they should live in that country. And we created at that time High Tech Park. In 2006, we started actually practically from the scratch. And we based actually our High Tech Park on three major pillars. The first pillar was education. Because actually we are not Russia. And unlike in Russia, we do not have many natural resources. We do not have oil. We do not have gas. We do not have black and color metal. We do not have enough wood. We actually do not have all these things that you can rely on while developing in terms of economy and in terms of the social life. But the biggest value that we have, and I think that in this case we're similar with Ukraine, the biggest value that we have is our people. And we should rely on this big value. And actually, one more thing, when I was saying about one pillar, the first pillar is education, you know, just we inherited from the Soviet Union many things, and also some contradictory history as well. But one thing we definitely inherited from the Soviet Union is the prestige of the higher education. And that's a very, very big value, because actually when our kids are growing up, all the parents, they say to these kids, look, you have to learn, you have to go to school, you have to study hard. And this is a big value because many countries, like for instance India or China or Vietnam or many African or Asian countries, they experience this problem because parents, they never spoke with their children this way. And we do. We try to say our children that, and that is the biggest value. So within a short period of time, we were able to teach our people that were not in high-tech sector, we were able to teach them how to use modern technologies, how to create modern technologies, and how to apply modern technologies in the real life. So based on our outsourcing companies, this was the first thing that we started from, we created schools, software engineering schools, based on our companies inside them. So we retrained the people from free, and they started to be high-tech people. Then the second pillar of our success is also education. So in this case, we looked at, experience of Israel that we had at that time, that about 1 million Jews, they immigrated from the from the Soviet Union to Israel, and they were not high-tech people. They were actually teachers, doctors, engineers, economists, working in some supermarkets, and so on and so forth. Only 1.4% of them were from high-tech sector. So one of the American Jews, John Bryce, he created John Bryce Educational Center and asked Motorola, the first American company, to come to Israel. So this company came and he started to retrain the people because actually, they could not work in kibbutzes because all the working places were taken in kibbutzes. So actually, and agriculture could not digest so many people from the Soviet Union. So he started to actually re-educate all these people, and after they received this education, they went to work to Motorola. Then HP opened, Microsoft opened their branches. So R&D centers started to appear in Israel, and all these Soviet Jews went there via John Bryce Educational Center. So we created actually the same initiative. We created the educational center in Belarus, where we started to get people out of the market, retrain them, and we bring them to our high-tech park. And the third actually pillar of our success is also education. But this education was based on the universities. We created about 65 different labs in our universities where people from different backgrounds, actually we went even to the linguistic university because we noticed that girls that study some English literature or whatever, they appear to be good in seeing mistakes. In seeing mistakes that actually software engineers did, and they were able to describe these mistakes, send it back. So they appear to be the best testers. They appear to be the best technical writers. They appear to be the best business analysts, because in many cases, for instance, if you do a project for, let's say, MetLife, just one of the biggest insurance American companies, you're not interested in Obamacare. Just why you should actually make a technical task for software engineers, taking into consideration the whole political environment. And this is the task for a business analyst, and these girls appear to be very good in that. Definitely, the biggest success of the Silicon Valley, the biggest success, is not that they have lawyers, like the whole street actually of law firms that can help you to protect your intellectual property rights. The biggest value is not the venture funds that you can see many of them. It's actually the street in Silicon Valley where you can go and visit any venture funds. No, the biggest reason of the success of the Silicon Valley is that they had enough software engineers there. They have enough engineers. And this was the background. This was the basis for their success. And just imagine, just a combination of a guy, just one guy, the name of this guy. He had 2 years of education, either Zen Buddhism or Hinduism, something like that, you know, one of the provincial American universities. And they had an idea to make computers, to make some devices. And in order to fulfill this idea, he needed a partner. He needed someone who would be able to fulfill his idea. And he found a partner. I met this partner. I had a conversation with him 3 years ago in Vienna. The name of the partner was Steve Wozniak, and he worked in HP. You know, and they created the best probably partnership, or one of the most successful partnership in the world. You know, they created an Apple company. The guy with an idea, with practical no background, with the guy with a technical background. So just our idea was the following. You know, just we were thinking, look, you know, just if the guy in Belarus or in Ukraine have an idea, he cannot go to Finland to find an engineer. He cannot go to Silicon Valley because he will be seen different environment. He should find a partner locally. And, you know, just this was actually one of our stimuluses to create a software engineering school. And now just we have many Israel partners, many Israel friends, that they have a saying. If you have an idea, don't share it with your compatriots. Come to Minsk and fulfill it. And that's what you should do, I think, in Ukraine as well. You know, because that's actually basically you can absorb the talent with idea, but because you do that, you should have a good engineering school, a good engineering background. And as a result of it, again, we started in 2006. You know, just now we have about 20,000 software engineers working in some of our companies. Our first resident of our high-tech park, they created now a school also in EPAM systems. They created a school in KIEF. Actually, they have about 2,000 developers also are open in labs and so on and so forth in different universities. And but besides of that, we have the so-called product companies. The product companies that are known now all over the world. It's the world of tanks. Probably some guys, you know, just if they do not play, but at least you heard something about it. You know, just this is, they appear to be twice in the Guinness Book of Records as the game that are played more people online than any other game in the world. Viber application, you know, just if you work for corporate clients, maybe you don't care about the prices of international calls. But if you pay from your own pocket, so you probably use this type of applications. So yeah, Viber actually appeared to be exactly the scheme that I mentioned. The two guys, our former immigrants from Israel, they came to our city of Brest and they started this business, you know, then they moved to our high-tech park to Minsk. And, you know, just now it was purchased by Rakuten, the Japanese tech giant. And I spoke with Hiroshi Mikitani, who is actually the owner of this Rakuten giant. They sold it for $900 million US. And the thing is that in our country, people, they see the future. They see that their future can be associated with your mental activity. The biggest capital is the people, and you can build a real capital with the intellectual capital. In Russia, you know, 70% people wants to be civil servants. Why? Because you cannot repeat the experience, the example of Abramovich. You cannot, or Vekselberg, or I don't know, Potanin, you know, because there are no oil fields anymore. So the only perspective that young people can see can become a civil servant for whatever reasons, maybe also because of the high level of corruption. You know, in our case, the best student this year we saw in engineering school. And that is actually one of the reasons for our success. But you should definitely make a tax gradient, you know, because the people, in order to absorb these good people, they should understand that this is the sphere, this is the industry where you can have three major things: high salaries, good jobs connected with international activity, and good office job, you know, not working in a dirty industrial plants with some pollution and things like that, but in a good office environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Valery. Sounds like we just need to do the same. Very comprehensive and insightful. Thanks. One thing Valery mentioned is that venture capitalists are not that important. But at the same time, they focus on products now. They've started with outsourcing, but climbed in the value chain, and products require investments and funding. And Eugene represents local venture fund. So what do you see from inside Ukraine? How do we attract capital in these turbulent times when Ukraine is in the red zone? Is it plus or minus? How Israel survived? And how did they manage to attract all that capital at the times of war? Please share your insights here.
Thank you for having me on this debate. I think it's very important timing for Ukraine for such debates, because we either survive as a country, as a nation, or become, some third world country, be back to third world, or become a satellite for EU, even if we join it, but we still be a poor country in a rich club. And I will start being provocative as my colleague and share one story. When I was in 19th in the school, I recall, when my teacher of geography told that Ukraine, that was the early 90s, Ukraine has the highest potential from all European countries. Where are we now? We are the lowest in GDP per capita in the whole region. High-tech sector so far has been, the driver of the economy, at least for the last 10 years. And I want to share my perspective, but first ask you guys, what do you think? Is this high-tech or software tech is a big industry today in Ukraine? What do you think? Raise your hands if you think it's a big one now. So probably you've been persuaded that we are not in the race. I would actually, before I answer the question on the venture capital market, which was non-existent 3 years ago and still, has some limited volume this year, would argue that high-tech sector is big for local economy, but it's non-existent on a global scale. Why it's big? If you take Ukrainian economy, you can see that major exports come from steel, then machinery, agriculture, few others, and software tech would be in top 5. So software tech is already playing a big role in Ukrainian economy. But how big is that? Probably 4 or 5 billion. That's my estimate. That would include both outsourcing product companies. So GDP-wise, for Ukraine, it's big. It's, probably 3-4% of GDP. But that's still few billions, There was example of Facebook. How many people they have? 6,000. Only 6,000. Ukraine has 100,000 engineers. And most of them work for outsourcing. For me, outsourcing, yes, it's a good thing. We could not have been, we could not have pursued the other way, probably other path. We could not have started with, big major product companies. But outsourcing is not the way to go. We have 100,000 people. Okay, we export 2 billion. How we can scale, add 200,000 more. How much we're going to export? That's easy math. 4 more billions. So, we'll grow from 2 bill to 6 bill. That's it. You cannot scale the outsourcing model. Now, on the product company side, my estimate is that only 5% of all engineers in Ukraine now work for product companies. Now, interestingly though, that this 5% create same level of value. It's again few billions in value created or revenue compared to, so 5,000 engineers can create as much value as other 95%, assuming they have the product right, assuming they do right partnership, assuming they probably have right co-founders from US or other markets or Israel, and assuming they own intellectual property and it's being protected, both here in Ukraine and outside. So now the venture capital side, 3 years ago when we launched a fund, there was literally no venture capital market here. So those few billions created in value on outsourcing side or the product company side, came from bootstrap companies. So companies that literally raised any funding or very limited funding. My colleagues here probably would laugh if I tell that, venture capital market in Ukraine, in a country with 100,000 engineers, just probably 30 million US per annum. That's like nothing, right? So in my view, when we are talking about software tech, the only way for Ukraine to succeed on a global scale and catch up on the race, because we are losing the race, we are still just, very small, compared to, if you take any 100 company in the world in high-tech business, that would be bigger than the whole industry in Ukraine. So that's small. So the only way to grow and scale the high-tech business is to build up product companies that are gonna develop IP, that are gonna own IP, they're gonna sell IP, and capture the value. So there is a lot of value created here. I keep talking to engineers. Some work for EPAM or Luxoft or Software Tsepkalo, but being based here, they work again for Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Intel, etc. But they just pay the salary, some margin, that's it. Then those companies like Microsoft sell the software back, and we pay, we pay actually much more, from import perspective than even the export and services. So now back to the question of venture capital. So obviously, we just argued that we need to build up the layer for product companies to succeed. And I fully agree that we need to build educational layer. We need, to open few R&D centers and have, some special clusters that would have sufficient synergy for tech companies, to extract the synergy and succeed together. We need also some regulatory environment or legislative, such as IP protection, or we like 3G, infrastructure is non-existent here. Some of you know that if you leave the office building and you go to the street, you cannot even check your email. It's not possible. We have the age, we have 2G. We have one of the few countries in the world that has no 3G whatsoever. So, but also important for me is venture capital ecosystem layer. Today, there are not a single company in the world that worth 1 billion that has been built without venture capital. Yes, you can bootstrap. Yes, you can create 10 million company, 100 million company, or even more, but there is not a single billion-dollar company in the world that not raised venture capital. And when I'm saying venture capital, I'm saying probably tens of millions. We are in the race, its technology changes so fast, so to succeed and compete globally, you still need a lot of capital at early stage to accelerate. And being based here in Kiev, you have to sometimes, on most of cases, compete with companies based in Silicon Valley who raise probably 100 million or 200 million or a billion or more. So, but to develop venture capital ecosystem, from my perspective, you need to do many different things that actually was spoken earlier today. You need to improve the business climate here. You need to improve investment climate. You need to improve easiness of doing business overall, not just for high tech. High tech is just one of Ukrainian sectors, but you need to change the whole country also to boost the high tech sector. Yes, there could be some sector-specific legislation, but most of potential would be unleashed if Ukraine improves the business climate, investment climate, etc. IP protection. That's probably one of very sector-specific things you need to do to Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Intel, and Cisco to come here and not being afraid that their IP would be stolen or any other reason. So actually, when we're talking about development venture ecosystem and some international companies coming to Ukraine, it's not that bad as you might actually think of. There are already some large international companies that have major R&D here, Samsung being one of them. And companies like Facebook, Google do actually develop software here, but this mostly would come through outsourcing companies. And hopefully one day they would open a major R&D here. And actually, opening R&D centers by, major international high-tech company would boost the whole ecosystem. Because to develop venture ecosystem, you need to do exits. If you want to do exits, you need to have local international companies being present here, not just flying on a plane for half a day for a conference and have 5 people on the ground. Now, look at Israel. Probably there's been Cisco outside of US. Cisco bought dozens, or Intel bought dozens of companies in Israel. But how they started? It started with small acquisition. It started from having R&D center there, and from then, that point of time, it has been a tipping point. That's not more about making a big stretch now, buying a company in some third world country. It's now mostly actually, taking more engineers, putting them in their office in Israel, and hopefully someday into KIEF, and leveraging that, that talent to build the global companies. So, I try to, give more comprehensive view of what's going on, but it's not really, hey, let us, Sequoia come and put 200 million fund here in Ukraine. No, it's combination of many different things that need to happen before we can, or, when we can take off. And the product company is the only way to go. And we do need, large international high-tech companies come here, open R&D centers, or acquire companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Yevgen. Over to Valery Fischuk, who represents Cisco in Ukraine, is regional director here. He's very Ukrainian, at the same time represents a global company. How do you bridge that? Working for Ukraine here on the ground, how do you drive global company to expand here? What do you think you can do to attract R&D to Ukraine? Same question basically, but with your Ukrainian experience and background.
Thank you very much, Roman. That was very easy. Just do your job and get your money. Coming back to the name and the basic objective of the forum, Ukraine from the third world to the first world. So the question to me is how to do this. The question is how to do this. We can repeat that kind of objectives many times. You can read it in papers. You can watch it on TV, making those nice speeches from presidents, from prime ministers, other people. Those mostly electional speeches. The same story. How? And that's the basic question, how to do this. And let me please just make connecting dots with you, ICT people, and thanks a lot that there are many of you in the audience, how to get your role for that strategy and what that role can be. How you, ICT people, and us, ICT managers and ICT workers in general, can influence that objective, can help the country reach that objective. So why do brains generally go out of the Ukraine? Why do people leave? So what's wrong with this? I think the problem is that those people leaving, the majority of them leave because they don't have jobs in Ukraine. They are not needed. There is no demand for them. And the question is, who creates that demand? How to retain people in Ukraine? You see, that's one issue. There's one set of issues. And in the meantime, the Ukraine is a country looking to double-digit growth in GDP, looking to make twice GDP growth for 2020, and other those strategies. And can we those two different worlds combine and use ICT brains and use ICT innovations and use experience with people to make it real, to help government, to teach them, to breed them, to go to government ourselves and make it. Ukraine jumps from the third world to the first world. Now, let's play some imagination games. Just recently, an hour ago, on the press conference, so I used it. So sorry that somebody of you may hear this again. So let's play the imagination game. Imagine yourself. This is a swimming pool. This is a swimming pool. Imagine that we are here speakers. We are swimmers, and the pool is 25 meters long. So the objective of every swimmer is to win. So there will be somebody who wins. There will be somebody who loses. Well, that's sports. But the question, why some swimmers win and others lose? Now imagine that type of the swimming pool is a global economy. And those swimmers are countries. The same conditions, temperature, the same. Audience, the same swimming lines. Almost everything's the same. But some countries lose and some countries win. That's competition. So what's the objectives of those countries, of those swimmers, for swimmers to reach, for countries? GDP growth, citizens' employment, citizens' welfare. If you take countries around Ukraine, the objectives are the same. Almost the same. Now the question, how to win? If the conditions equal and objectives the same of tens of countries around Ukraine, what unique things we have to, what unique, there's anything unique that we can use to win? Let's come back to swimmers. What do they do? What do they use? Well, there are swimmers using excellent drugs, pharmacology. Those kind of drugs that no kind of detection medicine can detect. There are swimmers that use unique training methodology, techniques. There are swimmers that use unique suits that water can glide, and the speed will be bigger. They can win. So what's the name? What's the general name for this? The general name for this is innovation. Innovation. So now the first conclusion that I would like to make. So the countries which would like to win, they need innovations, because innovations are instruments to reach those big, nice, and TV, radio that you listen to objectives. There is no other ways. Countries compete by instruments, and innovations is the basic one. And ICT is the biggest portion of it. So if you take ICT, information communication technologies, so that's the biggest portion of innovation. Now, can ICT be an instrument to reach that goal that I started with and the forum started today with, from third to the first world? I think yes. Because we don't compete by objectives, how nice they can sound, and whatever nice programs that could be that you listen to. Show us instruments. If somebody tells you tomorrow, I will fly to the moon, great. Great, how can you do this? The basic question is how. If you want to grow fast, we need to answer that question. How? Now, there's a huge conversation now. Which country to follow? Yeah, that's a general practice. Many world-famous consultants recommend to find the country that you want to follow. Very often, just recent months, we follow and we listen to those discussions from our country top managers. We listen about Georgia, about Moldova, about other close to us countries. But is that right to talk this way about? Is that right? Have you ever heard about the economical phenomenon which is called digital frog clip? So my point is that if we trying to reach the countries, we will always be the second, like swimmers. There's somebody who will be the second or the third one. If we use traditional approaches to managing the country, if we want to surpass, if we want to jump, to leap like a frog leaps, we need to put on the super advanced technologies, the super innovations, because these are the only instruments, to my point of view. I am persuaded in this that these are the only instruments which can make the country grow fast. What else do we need? What are those restrictions? We need to grow fast, that's speed, because swimmers, that's time for them, the biggest issue. Also energy, resources. Do we have time? No. Do we have resources? No. How can we reach double-digit growth in GDP in just 5, 6, so how many years without doing great innovations, without implementing, installing, creating, and not just creating and using great last day, innovations of yesterday. And that's the only thing which can help us. If there is an objective to grow that way, if this is just a pre-electional objective, that's quite different. In Cisco, for example, we are talking about connectivity of people. Like already mentioned today by Facebook representative, connectivity. There are countries which talk about hyperconnectivity today, which is connectivity. That's a great innovation. How many calls can you make during a day? You can make tens of calls, you can make thousands of calls. How many people can you meet during a day? Physically, you can meet a few of them. Actually, if you talk about traffic jams, other things, you can meet a few people per day. By using a mobile, you can meet more. By using email, you can talk to millions in seconds. Connectivity means productivity. You can do more with less energy, with less time. Productivity for everybody, for every person, for every family, for every household, for every industry means growing, means productivity, means influencing GDP, means influencing welfare with less time and with less energy, meaning resources. We don't have much resources in our country, let's be true. So we can, dream about great changes in the country. Now, let me connect ICT people who are bearers, to my mind, of great technologies and followers of great technologies and corridors to great technologies, innovative technologies. And those economy, country problems that we have now, that can be connected, to my mind. So if government believes in innovation, to my mind, there is no belief in innovation today, and there are no proper actions on that. Do you know who is responsible in country for innovations? Meanwhile, they are talking about reforms. They are talking about changing the country. The question is, can in those reforms ICT be used not just as a piece, not just as a part, but as a platform, but as the essence of any reforming? I think yes. That can create speed of growth. We can save money by this. IP as a product, as a technology was created exactly for that, to save money. Now the question is, doing reforms, can the government watch this industry, create demand for this industry, and attract people? Otherwise, they will leave the country, either go to Minsk, either go to other countries. They will leave. Let's create demand. Let's use it for reforms. And let's call it not just reforming. I would suggest a different word. To reform, реформировать, for me, means to digitize, оцифровать. Can reforming mean digitization? In this respect, just think about what those KPIs can be. Can a typical reform be called as successful one if it doesn't lead to growing of IP addresses, growing of ICT, computer and other usages in the country? I think with those global ICT trends, it's impossible. That kind of reform, I think, is not successful because the influence of global trends is big. And I don't remember, actually, I know many KPIs of many reforms. And I don't find that types of KPIs, which to my mind just is silly, which to my mind can lead to unsuccessful reforms. So the general now idea and the conclusion: ICT people can live in the country, can stay in the country, can be retained, and the government needs to create the atmosphere, show what types of changes can be done in the country, and people will follow those changes if they see it's worth to do. If they see money, if they see a place and space for creativity, and we can keep human capital not going away from the country but staying here. Government plays an essential role in retaining the human capital by changing itself. And if this government uses innovations, and if this government uses super innovations, we can make a digital frog leap. We need to think hard on that. I don't mean to say it's easy. I'm just trying to say that that's the way to do. And this way, for us, is more important than just an objective. So if there are lots of discussions, Europe or Russia, which way to go, guys, I think the objective is to start going. For us, the importance is to start moving, to go that way. It's more important for us than any objective in this respect. Sorry for that kind of philosophical, just the philosophical, thoughts, but I hope you caught the idea. Now, what types of instruments do we have? What types of instruments do we have to make it real, to make it happen? The government starts to create local demand, and ICT people start to work in that country and remain. I think just being present here and talk on that, that's the first thing to influence government. You can do it too, through media, and probably someday, let's hope dies the last, those brains in public sector can start to change, and they will think that there are no other instruments but innovations helping the country to succeed. That's my point. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Viktor. It's very important to understand that when we're talking products, we should be talking a broad picture. And products is innovation. That's how you build them, but innovation is around us in every piece of our activity. It's the way we run the country, it's the way we run the business, it's the way we interact between us. Innovation is everywhere, and then products are commercial pieces and components of that, but some things are not commercial. That's regulation, educational system, and so on. So Viktor Halasiuk represents the Ukrainian Association of Innovation and Development. I think you should have the answer on how do we do that, and what does it take to build innovative economy? What kind of regulations, legislative initiatives do we need? And the big debate in Ukraine is actually around incentives in particular. Many our legislators and economists are saying all industries should be equal. Like coal industry should have same incentives as IT. And when we look at the global market, it's not the case. We see many examples when cantons in Switzerland compete for a particular company, and they can offer certain taxation levels to single company to attract that business. And we see huge diversity in the ways how you incentivize growth, how we attract innovative business, how you, what kind of infrastructure do you provide? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Roman. I'm very thankful to all of my colleagues, and after such a brilliant speech and comprehensive discussion, I'm lucky just to reinforce two key points which it seems to me could serve as a sum up of our panel. The first one, that we should not concentrate on high-tech as a solely expert outsourcing sector. not connected to other sectors of economy. This is of crucial importance because Ukraine should become both a producer and a sophisticated user of high-tech. This is of key importance. So high-tech, it is not all about IT, and IT, it is not about IT outsourcing. This is of key importance, and we should not only serve as a producer, but also as a user and to implement it in all the spheres of our life. And such approach will help us to boost other spheres of economy, machine building and agri-business and others. And this will result in a real growth of GDP all over the country and prosperity of Ukrainians. Moreover, it will also ensure a new level of education and public service, which is of crucial importance, because we understand that this is a sphere which links all the things, all the spheres in our country, in our economy. And the second issue, that addressing high-tech development, we should concentrate not only on education aspect, because we should heavily concentrate on education, but at the same time, if we only develop our education and improve it, in the current conditions, it will result in only one result. Unfortunately, it will result in a new wave of brain drain from Ukraine. This is obvious, because if we lack strong tax incentives, if we lack strong regulatory incentives for high-tech companies, if we lack cash grants from government to develop high-tech products, if we lack for government procurements of Ukrainian R&D products in Ukraine, it means that we will just outsource, we will earn very little, and our future will not be so bright. So actually, it's of crucial importance to gradually shift or even radically shift from the raw material based model to the product model, and not only even in IT or in high tech, in every sphere of our activity. In machine building, not metallurgy, but machine building products, not just grain crops, but the products of processing these items. So it's of crucial importance. And when I talk about investment incentives, I mean the whole range of support from the government, because it's the role of government to establish this framework, nurturing entrepreneurship, nurturing high-tech business and production business. And I would like to highlight that equal opportunities in society, it doesn't mean that, for example, we should have a flat tax for all the industries, because currently we have a discrimination of high-tech industries, again, the raw material-based one. We have a huge tax burden on salaries, and you know that it is a huge problem to have legal salaries in Ukraine. And what's the way out of this? To heighten the tax rates next time. It's not a real solution. Real solution is to make a differentiate tax rates for industries according to their to the priorities of the government. The government should be very clear in their message. If they want to develop the country, they should say that this is product industry, this is outsourcing, and this is actually raw material-based industries. And they should be treated in different way. It's the only way to build the society of equal opportunities, of equal possibilities. And we should take into consideration and Ukrainian peculiarities, of course, but we have bright examples of other countries, like Singapore, like Malaysia, like Belarus, like Poland and Turkey, in building building new productions through industrial parks and facilitating development of high-tech business. And government shouldn't just look at the different business and different industries competing between themselves, because it's never possible for raw material business, for huge companies which just sell something, dig out of the land, and for science-based and knowledge-based industries and companies. We should understand it. We should communicate it in a very clear way to the government, because there is no actually alternative for such approach, because the only alternative is an imitation of reforms. And of course, it is not the case for Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Viktor. Thanks, everyone. We're running out of time, so let me just quickly summarize. And if anyone has any closing remarks, feel free to raise your hand. I've got a couple points out of this discussion. I think we do have an excellent industry right there. We have a legacy from the Soviet Union and engineering school. We do have educational system in place, which is inefficient, but we can reform it. It seems like we all agree that innovation is the way for Ukraine to win the global competition, or at least get on the map and participate in that marathon. Innovation means we do need to climb the value chain. We need to build products. We need to build IP. We need to make big money and big margins to reinvest those money in further development, because if we keep running on raw materials, which are cheap, if we keep running on outsourcing industry, which margin is also very limited, we're not going to be able to fund innovation, and we're not going to be able to enter the race. We're not going to be there even to start. We need to equip ourselves. We need to buy running shoes, and we need to train a little. And I think outsourcing industry is actually our training to get ready for the big game. But big money is big game, and to get there, we need to get products, IP, and innovation. There is no other way around. And that's very hard, because if we look at previous 10 years, we cannot claim that outsourcing industry, which is $2 billion of exports in size right now, that it appeared due to some efforts of the government or due to some efforts of the industry itself. It was very sporadic. It was an evolution. It was fairly simple business to do, which was driven by global economy. There was a demand, there was a supply of resources in Ukraine, global companies came here, and there was a boom in outsourcing in previous 10 years, and it's still growing at 30 to 40% year over year. But it's not that kind of a business which we dream about, which our country needs to get out of the current situation and economical situation. So big game is hard to compete with. And to play the big game, we now need to switch our brains on. We need to consolidate the industry. We need to get professional associations in place. And I'm very glad to see a couple associations created just recently over this year. Eugene represents the Venture Capital Association, then U-Angel, or Association of Angel Investors, has been created last month. Association of Innovation Development was also born this year, and so on. We see those professional communities being established. We see the brain power coming together, starting thinking and strategizing on those issues. And we do need to do more. We do need to translate that message to the government. We do have a new president, new cabinet of ministers. We are going through parliamentary elections now. We'll have new parliament. Basically, we have new people in place which seem to have an aspiration to rescue Ukraine and get it back on the global map as a wealthy country. They need our help, and they need a strategy. And when we reform Ukraine, I think IT and innovation should be right there as a cornerstone on that strategy. We need to make sure IT is either the locomotive or one of those key locomotives. We need to make sure that the government creates that environment. We need the industry to partner with the government to develop that ecosystem which is required to attract Facebooks and Microsofts and Cisco's R&D labs here. And I think we have all we need at the start, but lots of work ahead. And I thank everybody for sharing their ideas and visions. We'll stay in touch and hope we'll work on New Ukraine all together. Thank you so much for attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.